The Samsung S95B to the top, the Sony A95L to the bottom. Both TVs are the 55-inch version, but who's the winner? The winner is the Samsung S95B overall, but in terms of picture quality, they tie. I'm going to explain some finer things as to why I got to this conclusion, so stay through until the end if you like this kind of content, and smack a like on this video if you find it helpful. So let's go on by talking about the out-of-the-box experience, because there's no real way to talk about these TVs without addressing the fact that Sony is marketed as a master-calibrated display. And it's supposedly the best looking and, most accurate out-of-the-box. Well, what that means for you then is all you should have to do is pay $3,000, take it out of the box, and then there you go. You don't have to hire anybody. You've paid the premium. Wrong. What it looks like is garbage out of the box, and this is going to show you that. Okay, so professional mode is basically the reference accurate, stick in the mud, purist mode where everything is dull and has no color. Now I've gone through the liberty of ensuring that we are again in the absolute day one mode, no augments of any kind on my end, because you have to see what it's going to give you out of the box, okay? Now that we see what it's going to give you out of the box, okay, we're going to show you what it would have looked like, and then I'm going to show you after, okay, because this is not how I prefer to watch TV. And I'm going to say it like that because I'm sure there are people that might look at an image like this that's dead and washed out and missing a ton of color and go, you know what, I like this. This is fun to look at. For me, it's absolutely miserable and there's just too much color missing. So if that kind of is your feeling too, then maybe stay through for this next part where I show you what it's supposed to look like. And just like that, the Sony A95L is back from the morgue. I don't joke when I tell you that these TVs need a lot of work, TLC, that kind of thing, and it just continues in that way. Now, I said they were a tie in terms of image quality, and they absolutely are. Albeit, the Samsung at the top, S95B to be very specific, has the edge in terms of the color accuracy, color vibrancy, things like that overall. That doesn't mean that Sony doesn't edge them out in accuracy in other areas. So I found that no matter what I was watching, they trade back and forth a ton when we talk about who's more accurate for color. Then it got to the point where you really can't say one is more accurate than the other. You can't, because they both process the image quality very different. So when there are bright scenes, for example, like these puppies in the basket, Samsung's going to have better shadow detail, they're going to show more color, they're going to show more contrast and more clarity. Sony is going to give you more of that cinematic look where everything is more flat, you have more detailed information in the shadows, not as contrasty. It's more of a muted look, if you will, but not washed to the maximum degree, right? So it's a different kind of approach to creating image quality. Again, it's not to say that any approach is wrong, so to speak. It's just some will prefer one approach over the other. Now, where Sony edges out the Samsung is in terms of gradients. Samsung can be seen with low bitrate content and just in general really challenging color to have some sort of like banding issue from time to time. Again, really on that lower bitrate content. So you're going to struggle a bit from time to time depending on what you're doing, especially if you're forcing color spaces on things like PC. Sometimes you're going to run into some banding. Where on Sony, the smooth gradation feature keeps that stuff kind of smooth. Again, it's not that the Samsung is horrible, but it is noticeable in comparison to the Sony, so that is something Sony does have as a benefit over the Samsung. Now, in terms of like contrast, this is again one of those areas where they seriously go back and forth. One instance, you'll have Samsung coming through with all the highlight detail, vibrancy, saturation, clarity in the world, and then it'll switch to something where Samsung is getting beaten by Sony by a massive degree. Now, in most of the scenes, Samsung comes ahead in terms of highlights and contrast. That's just in most of the scenes. But in low light scenarios, that's where Sony tends to shine, because it's almost like if there's a black background and a character that's bright, Sony gives you that highlight where Samsung tends to stay pretty dark or relatively dark. And that's one of the nicest things about Sony. Now, that doesn't mean that Samsung can't do low light scenes, though. As you see in this example, Sony is actually going for the darker look because they're trying to expose for the background, which again, if you just look all the way back through here, they're trying to expose for this little sliver of light. So that's Sony's way of their whole like focal point adjustment algorithm for the XR processor, cognitive processor thing. It doesn't always get it right. And that's one of those things. It's a lot like a camera in a way where sometimes it's going to overexpose something or underexpose it. It's kind of like that. But it does a good job overall. Now, again, in terms of picture quality, most people are going to struggle greatly to see a massive difference between these two TVs when calibrated correctly. And I'm telling you right now, it's a great experience on either set. Both are phenomenal S-tier picture qualities. But the difference comes when we talk about the performance. So when we talk about performance, the big thing that I want to point to would be motion. Motion on the Sony is just worse. You can hear from whoever, wherever, that it's not, but it's worse. And that's the part that gets really uncomfortable for a lot of people that really like Sony TVs. Now, again, just to kind of throw this out there, I have a Sony OLED myself, and I've had one for years. So, again, I'll be showing that off as well for those who really feel like this is just me waiting every year to attack Sony. I own a Sony TV. I really don't care how they do. It makes no difference to me. But it is important for people who are spending their money who, like, maybe don't own a Sony TV already, get the information transparently and things like that, and that's just what I'm doing. Now, the other aspect of this with motion is we're talking about with motion processing on, because you can't test motion processing if you're not turning on that feature. Even if people don't like it and they say it looks like a soap opera, that is totally irrelevant, because motion processing, keyword being processing, means you have to test how it processes that motion. Now, the kicker was, if you watch my video showing the motion off, when you turn off motion processing, it's still bad. And this is the part where a lot of people just kind of skate that under the rug and say, no, there's no way. It's Sony. They're just the best because they're Sony. It's like, okay. Of course, these same people that will say that will never have any kind of comparison to show you the exact real-world example. We're talking chapters and movies, real content. But that's just kind of how these things play out. It's very emotionally driven sometimes when we talk about TVs because people get passionate. But the important thing to understand is, again, both are exceptional TVs. However, the Sony is coming in at $3,000, folks, okay? Like, let's be real here. They'd better do a damn bunch of stuff, like a whole hell of a lot of stuff for $3,000, and they're not. The reality is, I'm struggling so hard for the better part of what, like 2.5 weeks or whatever it's been since I've had this thing, trying to literally match the Sony to the Samsung. I'm trying to get Sony to arrive at a level that Samsung is at. And I'm like really killing myself to do this, by the way. Like, I'm up like 18 hours a day, like literally focusing on trying to nail this. And it's been so incredibly difficult because you hit walls with Sony that you just don't hit on Samsung as fast. And one of the biggest walls is the clarity limitation, the brightness limitation, the way that the colors are overly cool and cold. You have to overcome all of these challenges. And I've been able to do that mostly. It's not flawless and it's not as good as the Samsung in that way, but it is solid to the point where anyone could look at it and be like, wow, this is a beautiful TV. So mission accomplished there. But it's not normal. Nobody's doing that. I'm telling you right now. Nobody's going to sit there for 18 hours on a freaking TV trying to calibrate it and do that like 5 days in a week. Like, it's actually pretty cumbersome. So like even now I'm running on like, I don't know, what is it, like 3 hours of sleep or something stupid. So again, you have to put a lot of work into the Sony to get it to arrive at the Samsung. Those are points against the Sony, because out of the box for $3,000 with the whole master calibrated thing, it should have already been ready to go. I'm just being real there. The other aspect of this is when we talk about motion, the motion processing is bad, as I've mentioned, but then again, it's a very specific type of motion that does look bad. Now, there is a way to smooth out motion a little bit, which I'll show you here. If you go into picture settings, and you go into picture, and then you go down to motion, what you can do is you can go, make sure Cinemotion's on high, then go into motion flow, right? And then you go to custom, the film variant, okay, you have it set to +2, and the clearness, or not clearness, the smoothness for the camera set to max, and clearness low. Now you can also do the inverse of this as well, to where you have the smoothness for the film at max, and then you have the camera variant on basically two, either one will yield a beautiful result out of this television, right? So it's truly up to you as to how you want to go about it. But those are the only settings that I have found that like really give smoother motion that is a lot closer to what we have on Samsung. And I think that's really irritating because it should just be smooth because. But it gets a little better when you do it that way, but not better to the point where the motion doesn't have the same artifacts or jitters or blurring. It still is going to have bad motion. It's just not as bad. Now, I know I talked about sound, but it is shocking to know that the sound on the Samsung is better. There are people that will try to say that it's not. I had some people saying because the Sony's on the floor that had something to do with it, at which point I will just point out that Sony has what's called acoustic surface technology, which means the sound comes from the screen. So it really doesn't matter that the TV's sitting on the floor, and it's elevated up. So if anything, that wouldn't, again, be a problem because it's not flush like the other arrangement you can put the stand on. So yeah, I have it in soundbar mode, which is basically you can put a soundbar underneath. So that again, not a factor. I mean, again, we're just at this point, we're just trying to help people understand information, which I can never do. It's, I just give information. So at that point, if they don't understand it, like I can just explain it but not understand it for you. Like you have to just be willing to openly accept new information. But again, unfortunately, a lot of Sony owners are not willing to accept new information. They go by groupthink. And it's like, I heard everyone everywhere else say that it's amazing, therefore it's amazing, and you're just crazy. If you think that, just click off the video. Don't waste my time or yours. You know what you want, go buy a Sony. But for everybody else who wants to know what they're buying, like, it's not a bad TV, but it has some room for improvement. I mean, in every example that you'll probably see here, right, like you can notice seriously strong contrast on the Samsung. And it's to the point where it's like, the TV at the bottom is a $3,000 TV, and every time my mind hits that point, I'm like, that's unacceptable. Because in the one breath, I want to make excuses for it and say, well, there's no such thing as a perfect TV. I immediately double back to, yeah, but for $3,000, you'd better be. And then it just keeps going like that. And it gets to a point where it's just like, okay, the sound is better on the Samsung S95B. We have the better motion on the Samsung S95B. We have the better gaming features on the Samsung S95B, right down to like 144 Hertz, which the Sony cannot do. In HDR, Sony tends to be really bad for one particular thing. You have to basically throw away an entire picture preset for just HDR because Sony still has this same weird issue that they've had since they've started making modern TVs with HDR in it, where if you have HDR, it does not snap into its own HDR mode. Almost every other TV I've reviewed has their own HDR mode. Sony does not. Instead, you have to throw away a picture preset, and what's even worse, let's say you're calibrating your TV. Sony is a one-size-fits-all type calibration, and that is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, where other brands, like the Samsung here, decides to let you go per picture mode that you're in per HDMI source. It is so much more effective. Here's what I mean. On the Sony, if you, for example, calibrate in Expert 2, everything on every picture mode will be that same exact adjustment. And you have to redo the whole thing, and it will hold. You basically lose an entire, color, color temperature with Expert 2. It's stupid. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen, and Sony keeps doing this year after year as if anybody wants that. And that's their biggest downside. Now let's talk positive since we've introduced so many negatives. In low light scenes like in this one on the screen right now, the Samsung at the top will struggle to maintain the luminosity. Sony does not have that problem and instead will blast out beautiful color and beautiful highlights, maintaining near perfection in low lit scenes. It is a thing of beauty and marvel on this TV that honestly is one of the things that draw you in and make you want to keep watching it. Because when you get to like dark scenes in movies, we're so used on, especially on OLED, for things crushing out. And the Samsung is not brightening up those faces at all. It's just kind of like, you get a dark picture when it gets to a dark scene. And I just don't think that that's intelligent at all, given so-called pixel level illumination. You should be able to do what Sony's doing at the bottom, which is, again, $1 million idea there that they need to stick with and just perfect. Don't get stagnant, don't get lazy. Keep doing exactly what they're doing right here, because that is the sauce. And again, explosions are affected as well. I'm pretty sure you can see this on YouTube, but if you can, I'll explain what's happening. Basically, the Samsung gives you detail and wonderful color because they're not as bright, but counteractively, they don't have the same luminosity behind the explosion. So that's another aspect of this as well to consider, that like sometimes Samsung is just not going to be able to play on the same level as the Sony will be able to play on. But they do give you the better color. So it's like you start having to pick and choose your battles, and it does go by scene to scene. It really will depend on what you're looking at, to be completely honest with you. But again, going back to more low-lit scenes, again, this is another example where the Samsung at the top is going to be dimmer than you're going to have on the A95L at the bottom, where you're going to have shadow detail. You're going to have the it's just a stronger representation of a low-lit scene. It just is. Now, there's a way around this with Samsung with some very creative settings, which I won't dive into right now. Yes, you can counteract it and, again, just do some really creative stuff that gives you back that shadow detail and the extra luminosity. So technically, it is a bit of a moot point if you do it that way, but to be very honest, few people are going to do that kind of thing, and so I'm not going to go completely off of that because, to be fair, we're just going to make the video the way we're making it now, where we're just saying as a general thing, if you don't have any of the knowledge that I would use to do this, then you're probably going to watch it like this. And that's, I think, also the other part of being super technical with this stuff is just representing it in a way where it represents everyday people as well, not just someone like me that like I'm a fucking nerd for this, right? Like, this is what I do. So it's like that part of it also considered. And again, it's not like Samsung's producing a bad image either, right? I think, again, they are so incredibly comparable to one another, but therein lies the problem. I don't want comparable when I'm paying more money. Like, when I'm paying a premium, I expect the red carpet to be rolled out and I'm being treated like the high-paying customer that I am, given, the best image quality on earth that money could buy. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but that just does not happen on the Sony A95L. It doesn't, because the Samsung is right there. Like, not even like, oh, well, it's close, it surpassed it. Like, colors are just better overall on the Samsung, and it's ridiculous. Now, again, Sony has some great colors, but it's getting its ass kicked, and I didn't want to see that for that kind of money. I would have wanted to see a stronger showing for Samsung, or rather for Sony, than Samsung, especially given the price difference between the two. Now, done harping about that. Again, it really just boils down to a few simple things, and these simple things are as follows. Sony is a great TV, however, they are limited in their calibration capabilities. It's really annoying to have to throw away an entire picture preset and an entire color temperature anytime you're doing HDR, and in general anytime you're calibrating. They need to have their own separate modes for HDR, and when you're calibrating, they just need to have a way of separating things a bit better. But they just don't. It's still the dated way that I have on my A8G Bravia OLED, which I absolutely hate the way calibration works there because it's very inconvenient. But c'est la vie. Gaming. Again, it's good, it's solid, but limited, and by comparison to something like the S90C on the market right now that's on sale for literally $12.97, you'd be an idiot, and I'm going to say it exactly like that without any apologies, to buy the A95L over the S90C. You just would be. Because in my comparison, the picture quality was damn near identical, and the sound was every bit as good. And it's got all the features that the S95B has, so it's to the point where it's just kind of like, if you were to go a different route, i.e. the Samsung, or rather the Sony A95L, that'd be pretty stupid, I'm not going to lie. At this point, even with them taking some money off of it for Black Friday, which, good luck, because that's $2,400, $2,500, it's still stupid. It's stupid. It's absolutely stupid. And I'm sorry, but there's just no way it's justified. Like, it's just not. And I'm trying to look at every avenue. I really am. And the more I look at it, the more I'm realizing it's just, no, not for the price. You've got to wait for this thing to come down. Again, if you look at scenes like this, like if you're only watching movies that have a bunch of dark scenes like this, luminosity on the faces look way better on the Sony. That's a big strength. That's wonderful. What did you pay $3 grand for it? I don't know about that shit. Not me. That's way too much for that. That's a very small gain when almost everything else is like a little bit better on the other brands. Again, only you can decide what you want, and that's what this information is here for. It's to guide you, not to tell you what to do. So as long as you have the information, then that's all I can do for you. But essentially, that is why I arrived at the conclusion that the Samsung S95B is better. Colors are stronger, game mode features are better, motion processing is better, sound internally is better, and price is better. When we factor all those things together, it just arrives at the logical conclusion that the better TV is the Samsung S95B. Then I know I stepped on a bunch of toes, but again, I did show what it looked like out of the box for a reason, because you need to see that if I didn't have my settings locked into the Sony A95L, it would be a landslide victory for the Samsung S95B rocking my settings. So you have to know what you're doing, which is the other element of this. You're paying $3 grand, and you already need to go hire somebody to try to dial it in. And the only people that you hire or would be able to hire, they calibrate to an outdated reference standard that makes everything look washed out, telling you need to retrain your eyes and get used to less color and less vibrancy and less everything. It ain't worth it. And they charge you like $500 to do it. It's not worth it. Join my membership and stop suffering. $4, bro. $4.99, and I got you covered. Yes, I undercut them by a lot because I don't believe in the practice of shaking people down in order to profit on something that's like so basic. And that's really just getting picture quality that is worth a damn out of your TV. But that being said, that does help the channel out, and that is why I do even have my settings through what we call what is it? A paywall, as people like to say from time to time. I do it that way because we are crowd and self-funded, being very transparent. This channel is run by you guys, the viewers, which is how I'm able to be so honest year after year, which is why I thank you guys every time, because without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this awesome thing here where we help each other get the transparency and the truth that we are looking for. So really, honestly, to everybody who supports this channel, seriously, pat yourself on the back, because you are helping put transparency back in the hands of everyday people like yourself, and I couldn't be more grateful for that. But if you have questions as to what we're doing and how we're going to go forward with other review processes, just let me know. Ask questions where you have them. And with that being said, I want to thank you guys for watching the #1 brand in honesty. And until the next video, I'll see you guys later.